Have you ever thought that perhaps thought itself can become too dangerous? That a mind, upon touching certain truths, might not withstand the weight of what it sees? There are ideas that liberate, and ideas that burn. There are thoughts that open doors, and thoughts that tear the soul apart. Friedrich Nietzsche lived both. He was the philosopher who wished to see the world without veils, and ended up seeing too much. They say that the fire of knowledge illuminates. But no one speaks of what happens when the light is too strong, when the flame no longer enlightens, but blinds. Nietzsche walked through that fire, and the price of lucidity was his own sanity. History calls him mad. But perhaps madness was simply the way the universe found to protect a man who had gone too far into the truth. Nietzsche was not a common thinker. He was a force of nature, a volcano of consciousness erupting against the limits of human reason. In every line he wrote, there is a wound. In every idea, a flame. He didn't talk about philosophy, he lived it. And that is why, in the end, philosophy consumed him. God is dead, he said. And with that phrase, he lit the fuse of an entire century. But the death of God was not the end of everything, it was the beginning of the void. The beginning of an era in which man, freed from illusion, became imprisoned within himself. Nietzsche saw it before everyone else. He saw the future, and the future drove him insane. Nietzsche was born in 1844, in Rocken, a small village in Germany. The son of a Lutheran pastor, he grew up surrounded by hymns, prayers, and silence. From an early age, destiny seemed to point him toward faith. But even within the walls of the church, the boy already felt that something didn't fit. While others prayed with their eyes closed, he kept his eyes open, and saw too much. He saw the contradiction between the love preached and the fear imposed, between the promise of heaven and the control of the soul. He realized that religion offered comfort, but at the price of freedom. And within that boy, a seed was planted, the seed of doubt. For many, doubt is the beginning of damnation. But for Nietzsche, it was the beginning of truth. Because to doubt is to begin to awaken. In his youth, Nietzsche was a prodigy. At 24, he became a university professor in Basel. But his genius came with a price. As his mind flourished, his body weakened. Intense migraines, vision problems, nervous breakdowns. His body was too small a prison for such an immense soul. He read, wrote, and thought with feverish intensity. For Nietzsche, thinking was not a choice, it was a compulsion. It was the air he breathed. But that air was dense, suffocating. He plunged deeper and deeper into the questions no one dared to ask. What if life has no purpose? What if God is only a reflection of human fear? What if good and evil are inventions? These questions are not neutral. They are blades. And whoever grips them too tightly ends up bleeding. Nietzsche held on. And he bled. The young philosopher began dismantling everything he had been taught. Faith, morality, reason, all passed through the fire of doubt. He wanted to understand not what man believed, but why he believed. Why do we need a God? Why do we need rules? Why do we fear freedom? And the answer he found was terrible, because man is too weak to face the void. Nietzsche's God is dead is not a cry of celebration, but an echo of pain. God dies when man ceases to believe. And when man kills God, he finds himself alone, without a higher meaning, without cosmic order, without a written destiny. The free man is also the lost man. Nietzsche did not destroy faith. He merely revealed that it was already collapsing. And in the place of the sacred, he saw nothing being born, nihilism. The desert of the soul. The absence of meaning. And now, he asked, how do we live without a center, without truth, without a north? Most flee from that question. Nietzsche did not. He looked into the abyss. And the abyss looked back. It was in that gaze that his mind began to fracture. Because there is a fine border between genius and collapse, between enlightenment and insanity. And Nietzsche crossed that border. There is one symbolic scene that defines his life. Turin, 1889. Nietzsche walks the streets when he sees a horse being whipped. He runs to the animal, embraces it, and cries. There, in the middle of the square, the philosopher who defied the gods finally breaks. His mind can bear no more. The man who sought to carry the weight of the world is crushed by it. From that moment on, Nietzsche descends into silence. 11 years of darkness. Lucidity had devoured him. But what destroyed him also made him eternal. Because the philosophy that drove him mad is the same that revealed the inner workings of the human soul. Nietzsche went insane, but we, to this day, live inside his madness. His philosophy is like a shattered mirror. Each fragment reflects one face of truth, and each face cuts. He taught us that life is not meant to be comfortable, but to be overcome. That suffering is not a mistake, but the price of consciousness. That meaning is not given, it is created. And that the greatest form of sanity is the courage to face one's own madness. Nietzsche did not lose reason. He simply went beyond it. And that is why we call him mad, because he saw what we still fear to see. Thinking, for Nietzsche, was never an intellectual act. It was existential, a leap into the dark. While other philosophers wrote to explain the world, he wrote to survive it. His works are not cold treatises, they are contained screams, explosions of consciousness, desperate attempts to give shape to the unspeakable. Nietzsche did not search for answers. He searched for meaning. And meaning, for him, was not hidden in temples, nor in sacred books, nor in the promises of science. Meaning lived inside chaos itself. But there is a price for staring too long into chaos. Those who gaze upon it for too long end up lost within it. Nietzsche knew this, and still, he looked. In every page of the Gay Science, of Thus Spoke Zarathustra, of Beyond Good and Evil, there is a tension between two worlds, lucidity and collapse, the mind striving for clarity, and the body already unable to bear the burden of thought. Nietzsche lived as a battlefield. On one side, the light of reason, on the other, the darkness of the abyss. And he walked between them, without rest, without truce. Lucidity, in Nietzsche, is a kind of fever. Not a gift, but a curse. Because to see what no one else sees is also to carry what no one else can bear. He said, "The higher we soar, the smaller we appear to those who cannot fly. But flight requires altitude, and the air up there is thin. Solitude is the price of vision." Nietzsche lived as an exile from his own species. His colleagues ridiculed him. Universities rejected him. Friends drifted away. The church despised him. And even love, love, abandoned him. Lou Andreas Salome, the woman who fascinated him, the muse he longed to share his life with, said no. And that refusal wounded him in a way no book could heal. Nietzsche did not crave possession, he sought spiritual complicity. But even in that, he was betrayed. The man who dreamed of liberating humanity could not liberate himself from his own solitude. He said, "Solitude is to the spirit what fasting is to the body, a dangerous nourishment, but one that purifies." Nietzsche fasted in spirit. And the more he fasted, the more he saw. And the more he saw, the more it hurt. He looked at the modern world and saw decay. He saw a humanity sickened by morality, by conformity, by mediocrity disguised as virtue. Modern man, he said, is a domesticated animal, a being who trades freedom for security, authenticity for approval. He called this the morality of the slaves. A morality invented by the weak to weaken the strong. A morality that glorifies humility, sacrifice, guilt, to keep everyone on their knees. Nietzsche did not want the end of morality, he wanted the rebirth of strength. Not a violent strength, but a creative one. The strength to affirm life with everything it brings, pain, laughter, fear, fall, death. He said, "Become who you are." But who dares to become what they are? Most prefer to live as copies. Nietzsche demanded originality. And that is unbearable for those who still need a shepherd. With each work, Nietzsche became more radical. Not in hatred, but in lucidity. And lucidity, when it finds no rest, drives one mad. He questioned everything: science, religion, the state, love, truth. Nothing was sacred, except the very act of questioning. Man, he said, should be the creator of values. God was dead, therefore, man's duty was to create the meaning he once received. But there lies a paradox. Those who try to create total meaning risk discovering that no meaning is absolute. And that void, that abyss between the desire to create and the limit of being, is what began to tear him apart from within. Nietzsche did not go mad suddenly. It was a slow, silent collapse, a drop-by-drop lucidity that turned into poison. He said, "The snake which cannot shed its skin perishes. So too with the minds that are prevented from changing their opinions." Nietzsche was constantly shedding skins. And each change isolated him further. Friends abandoned him, readers called him blasphemous, and the world grew smaller before the vastness of his mind. But Nietzsche's tragedy was not rejection. It was excess of consciousness. He saw too much, understood too much, and carried a lucidity the world was not ready to bear. When he wrote "Thus Spoke Zarathustra," he was not merely creating philosophy, he was prophesying. He spoke of a new man, the overman, a being who lives without commandments, who creates his own path, who transforms life into art. But that man had not yet been born. And Nietzsche was alone, crying out in the desert of modernity. Zarathustra was not a character. It was a mirror. It was Nietzsche speaking to himself, trying to convince his own spirit not to collapse. "I thirst for men who are like lightning, great and terrible." But the world did not want lightning. It wanted shadows. After 1880, his body began to crumble. The attacks would leave him bedridden for days. His vision failed. The mind, once like a burning sun, began to fragment into scattered flames. Yet he continued to write, sometimes lying down, feverish, almost blind. He wrote with a ruined body and an erupting soul. And the weaker the body became, the stronger the mind burned. Nietzsche wrote as one fights extinction. Every word was an attempt not to die. In one of his letters, he wrote, "I am not a man, I am dynamite." And it was true. For everything he touched exploded: beliefs, values, illusions. Nietzsche detonated the 19th century, and in doing so, shaped the entire 20th. But dynamite does not explode unscathed. It destroys also the one who lights it. Nietzsche's thought was both match and fuse to his own mind. With each new idea, something inside him cracked. He wrote about the eternal return, the idea that everything we live repeats infinitely, exactly the same. For him, it was the ultimate proof of love for life, to accept reliving everything, including suffering, without wishing to change a single thing. But imagine the weight of that, to love even the pain, to love even the madness, to love even the chaos. Nietzsche did, and chaos consumed him. He believed that pain is not punishment, but the workshop of the soul. That suffering is the hammer of God, even when God is dead. But those who live with their hearts open to fire inevitably burn. Nietzsche burned. But from the ashes rose something that does not die, a thought still alive, an echo that still resounds in minds brave enough to think. He said, "Man is something that must be overcome." But no one explains how much it hurts. To overcome oneself is to die a little every day. It is to strip away certainties, to abandon the comfort of answers, and to accept living on the trembling ground of doubt. Nietzsche lived there, in that abyss between lucidity and madness. And perhaps he became what he always sought, a man beyond man. But the price was high. Too high for any mind to bear. There is a point where thought ceases to be quest and becomes torment. A point where knowledge no longer brings light, but fever. Nietzsche reached that point. The lucidity that once allowed him to understand the world now made him beg for silence. His brain no longer slept. Ideas collided like lightning inside his mind. He heard too much, felt too much, saw too much. And when consciousness expands beyond what the body can bear, the body defends itself, with illness, with exhaustion, with madness. Nietzsche wrote, and every word seemed to come from the brink of sanity. Paper was the only territory where he could still breathe. But even the paper began to burn. God is dead, he said. And that phrase echoed so deeply within him that it became a curse. Because when you kill the meaning of the world, it is you who must create a new one. And no one, not even the strongest of men, can bear alone the weight of recreating the universe. Nietzsche tried. But the universe is vast, and man is finite. His letters from his final years reveal a mind in combustion. Nietzsche wrote to old friends, to kings, to gods, to imaginary enemies. He called himself Dionysus, the god of ecstasy and destruction. He signed, the crucified. He blended irony and delirium, poetry and despair. He said, when I look to the future, I see a dawn. But to reach it, I must cross the darkest night. And he did. The night swallowed him whole. Turin, January 1889. The cold cuts through the air. Nietzsche walks the streets, tense, exhausted, carrying within himself a collapsing universe. Suddenly, he sees a man whipping a horse. The animal screams. Nietzsche runs to it, embraces it, and weeps. The scene is simple, almost banal. But there, in that instant, the border between the human and the divine breaks. Nietzsche feels the pain of the entire world. He feels the suffering of all beings. He feels the weight of what it means to be alive. And the mind, that mind that dared to understand everything, shatters. There, the philosopher bids farewell to the world of men. There, silence begins. For the next 11 years, Nietzsche would live in an almost vegetative state. The mind that had once been a storm of ideas was now a desert. He no longer spoke, no longer wrote. He merely existed, sitting, staring into the void, his gaze lost in some point no one else could see. Some said he had been punished. Others said he had touched the absolute and could not endure it. Perhaps it was both. For there is a border where thought ceases to be human and touches the divine, and the divine, seen too closely, is unbearable. Nietzsche was the man who reached that border. And the price was his own mind. Nietzsche's collapse was not merely biographical. It was symbolic. It was the collapse of modern reason itself. A warning that thought, when severed from life, becomes sick. Philosophy consumed him because he refused to keep it on paper. He incarnated it. He lived each idea to its limit. And the limit broke him. While other philosophers wrote about suffering, Nietzsche turned it into language. While others spoke about will, he lived it as fever. He said, pain is the hammer that shapes the spirit. But he forgot that the hammer, when it strikes too much, also shatters the form. Nietzsche's mind became a cracked mirror, reflecting fragments of a truth no one wished to see. In his last lucid months, he wrote sentences that sounded like oracles. I am a destiny. One day, my name will be associated with something terrible, a crisis unlike any the earth has ever known. And he was right. His thought would be used, distorted, manipulated. His sister Elizabeth, nationalist, anti-Semitic, fanatic, inherited his manuscripts and falsified many of them. She turned Nietzsche into a prophet of ideas he would have despised. The man who fought against every form of dogma became, ironically, an idol. But the true Nietzsche, the free spirit, the poet of chaos, survived between the lines. Not in the cries of fanatics, but in the silence of those who still dare to think. The collapse did not erase the philosopher. It transformed him into a symbol. Nietzsche became the living metaphor of the danger of thinking too much, of seeing too much, of feeling too much. But he also became the proof that there is something in the human mind greater than the mind itself, an impulse that insists on seeking meaning even as everything falls apart. He said, he who has a why to live can bear almost any how. But what happens when the why disappears? When even meaning dissolves? Nietzsche found the answer through the body. Madness was the final gesture of his philosophy, a total plunge into the mystery of existence. The man who killed God died in silence. But his silence speaks. It speaks through universities, through books, through films, through restless souls. It speaks every time someone, lost in life's chaos, whispers, "What if nothing makes sense? Is life still worth living?" For that is the question that drove him mad, and also the one that made him eternal. Nietzsche was not merely a man who thought beyond the limit. He was the limit in human form, the line between reason and the abyss. And it is upon that line that we all walk whenever we dare to seek truth. They say madness is the limit of reason. But what if the opposite is true? What if madness is what happens when reason touches the infinite? Nietzsche did not go mad because he lost his mind. He went mad because he saw too much, because he dared to look the sun of truth in the eye, and the sun, when faced without a veil, blinds. The philosophy he created freed him from the world, but also tore him away from it. Because thinking, for Nietzsche, was a way of living, and living, for him, was a way of burning. He said, "Thinking is the attempt to transform blood into spirit." And he transformed so much blood into spirit that the body could no longer sustain the weight of the soul. What we call Nietzsche's madness may have been the moment when the human tore open, and the divine escaped through the wound. He did not lose reason. He simply went beyond what the world calls reason. He crossed the mirror of consciousness and discovered that, on the other side, thought is made of silence. Nietzsche always knew that every search for truth is dangerous. Because truth does not comfort, it destroys. And every destruction demands a rebirth. That is why, in his last writings, he no longer spoke as a man, but as a symbol. Nietzsche became what he had studied, the free spirit, the flame that consumes illusions, the poet who turns chaos into dance. When reason broke, lucidity was freed. Nietzsche ceased to be a thinker, and became a living experience. His still body, his fragmented mind, were the reflection of a humanity in ruins. He was the mirror of his own time, a century that had lost God and had not yet found what to put in his place. Nietzsche lived what everyone fears to live, absolute emptiness. And he survived it. Even in silence, even without words, his gaze seemed to say, "I have seen nothingness, and nothingness is also something." Some say madness destroyed him. But perhaps it was the opposite. Perhaps madness was the way the universe spared him from too much clarity. The human mind was not made to see everything. There are truths that can only be endured through poetry. And Nietzsche was the poet of the unbearable. He wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow." But he also realized that sometimes the why disappears. And when that happens, what remains is only the act of enduring. And enduring, even in silence, is also creation. Nietzsche saw madness not as illness, but as revelation. He saw in delirium the symptom of a soul overflowing. The mind that goes mad is the one that refuses to live halfway. It is the mind that seeks the infinite within the finite. And that is where all geniuses break, when they realize that the soul is greater than the body, and the body cannot bear it. Nietzsche crossed that point. And he did it consciously. He knew his thought was dangerous, but he preferred danger to ignorance. To live is to suffer. To survive is to find meaning in suffering. He did not flee from pain. He dove into it completely. And the depths opened like a portal. In Zarathustra, Nietzsche described 3 transformations of the spirit. The camel, who bears the weight of the world, the lion, who destroys the chains, and the child, who creates a new beginning. Nietzsche lived all 3. He began as the camel, carrying morality and tradition. Then he became the lion, roaring against God, the church, and the common man. And he ended as the child, silent, pure, gazing into nothingness as if watching a star being born. Madness was that final childhood, the return to zero, where there is no more right or wrong, only the miracle of existing. In his muteness, Nietzsche became the symbol of what cannot be said. He stopped explaining the world and began to inhabit it in silence, like a mystic without religion, a prophet without faith, a man who had touched the mystery of life itself. Did philosophy drive him mad? Perhaps. but only because he lived it with too much truth. And truth, when fully embodied, is always unbearable. Nietzsche was the body that could not endure the spirit. But he was also the spirit that survived the body. Nietzsche's madness is, in itself, a metaphor for humanity. All of us walk the same thin line between reason and chaos. All of us carry within us a mind that can shatter the instant it dares to see too much. But Nietzsche taught us that the abyss is also a mirror. And whoever has the courage to look into it discovers that the abyss returns a new face. The philosopher who went mad was the same one who freed thought from the prison of faith. And in losing his mind, he gained myth. Nietzsche died voiceless, but his silence still screams. I was the man who saw the world without veils, and still, I loved it. He believed that man fulfills himself only when he is able to transform pain into creation. And he did, to the limit. He turned despair into philosophy, illness into language, fall into legacy. Nietzsche is not remembered for madness, but for the courage to go mad, to not flee from his own thought, even when it became unbearable. For there is a lucidity that kills, but there is also one that resurrects. And Nietzsche lived both. In the end, his madness was not the end, it was the beginning of a new vision. The philosophy that destroyed him also made him immortal. Because there are ideas that only survive when they die with the body that created them. Nietzsche died in silence, but his work still speaks with the fire of those who have crossed hell and returned with a torch in hand. And what it says is simple and terrifying. Life is hard, but it's all we have. Love it. Nietzsche's silence has echoed through the century. And somehow, we are still trying to answer it. When he went silent, the world began to speak of him. When he went mad, philosophy awoke. Because what Nietzsche lived was not just a collapse, it was a revelation. The revelation that the human being is capable of thinking to the very edge of sanity. And that this edge is, at once, curse and miracle. At the dawn of the 20th century, Freud read Nietzsche and saw himself reflected. The Freudian unconscious is, in part, born from the abyss Nietzsche revealed. Freud looked inside man and saw what Nietzsche had already seen, that the true battlefield is not the world, it is the mind. Then came Jung, and went even deeper. He saw in Nietzsche the archetype of the spirit in crisis, the soul that bids farewell to the gods and struggles to be born again. For Jung, Nietzsche was not a patient, but an initiator, a man who crossed the darkness of the collective unconscious and could not find his way back. Then came Heidegger, Sartre, Foucault, Deleuze, each, in his own way, an heir to the same thunder. All of them heard, in silence, the same question echoing since Turin. Who will we be now that God is dead? Nietzsche left no answers. He left echoes. And each philosopher of the 20th century answered with his own voice. Sartre answered with existentialism. If God is dead, then man is condemned to be free. Camus answered with revolt. Even without meaning, we must still affirm life. Foucault answered with power. We are shaped by invisible forces, and must deconstruct them. But all of them drank from the same source, that dark spring Nietzsche opened with his own madness. For his madness was not an ending, it was a portal. The portal through which philosophy ceased to be mere reasoning and became flesh, blood, poetry. Nietzsche opened a wound in the history of thought, a wound that never healed, and perhaps never should. For from that wound, modern consciousness was born. We live in a world without gods, but still thirsty for transcendence. The altars have changed, but the emptiness remains. Nietzsche saw it before all others. And that is why he remains so relevant, because he did not write for his time, but for all times. He looked toward the future and saw the digital man, alone, overloaded with information, and starving for meaning. He foresaw the era of disguised nihilism, an age in which we speak too much but feel too little. Nietzsche whispers to us from the depths of time. You have everything, except yourselves. He was called the prophet of chaos, but perhaps he was the prophet of healing. For only those who recognize chaos can begin to dance. Nietzsche did not want to destroy the sacred. He wanted to liberate it. He wanted to bring it back to the earth, to the body, to living experience. He said, "The body is a great reason, a plurality with a single meaning." He wanted a sacred that breathes, that moves, that incarnates itself in existence. He wanted a divine not above man, but within him. And that is what makes him so dangerous, and so necessary. Nietzsche invites us to look within, to become creators of our own meaning. But to create requires destruction. Before the new can be born, the old must die. That is why he killed God, not out of hatred, but out of love for truth. And in doing so, he left man face to face with himself, naked, vulnerable, free. That is the tragedy and the gift of his philosophy. Nietzsche took away the ground beneath our feet, but gave us wings. He said, "There are no facts, only interpretations." That sentence, seemingly simple, is a bomb within the structure of Western thought. It destroys the myth of single truth, of absolute morality, of fixed meaning, and puts in its place something far more frightening: responsibility. If there is no ready-made truth, then we must create it. If there is no destiny, then we must write it. If God no longer dictates the rules, then we must become creators ourselves. And creation is the most divine act there is. Nietzsche believed that every human being carries within an artist asleep, and that the purpose of life is to awaken him. Art, for him, was not escape, it was salvation. The highest way to say yes to existence.